My name is Claire Doyle. I'm 35 years old. And the night I found out exactly what my stepmother was capable of, I was standing in a hospice corridor holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee that had already gone lukewarm in my hand. The door to my father's room was open maybe 6 inches. Just enough to hear through, not enough to see. She'd asked the aide to step out for a few minutes, said she wanted some quiet time with him. Then I heard her voice drop low, the kind of low that isn't meant to be gentle, it's meant to be private. Sign it now, Walter. Otherwise, she dragged this out in court for years over nothing. A pause. Then the sentence I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. I'm the one who never left this house. My father was 3 days from dying. He didn't have the strength to lift a water glass off his own tray table. Above his bed, a little monitor, the kind you'd put in a nursery, glowed with a soft amber light, same as it had for weeks. I didn't push the door open. I didn't drop the coffee. I stood in that hallway and I listened. Because 12 years in probate litigation had taught me that the person who reacts first is usually the person who loses. What my stepmother said in the 4 minutes that followed is the reason. She now owes my father's trust $2.9 million. But before you feel good about that number, you should know how close I came to losing everything, simply by not paying attention soon enough. Welcome back to her side of the story, for every woman who held it together, alone. If this is the kind of story that hits home for you, stay with me, and don't forget to subscribe before you go. Let me back up, because the hallway isn't where this begins. It's where it almost ended. I'm a litigation paralegal in Sacramento. My specialty is trust and estate disputes. A nice way of saying, I watch families claw at each other over money that used to belong to someone they loved. I build the timelines, organize the exhibits, hand the attorney the right document at the right second. I'm good at it, and nearly invisible doing it, which suited me fine for years. People who know me call me steady. My old supervisor called me thorough. My father called me Bear, short for Claire Bear, a name from when I was small enough to ride on his shoulders at the county fair. And he said it like it was the highest compliment a person could earn. 4 years ago, a firm in California offered to more than double what I was making back home in Michigan. I packed my car and drove west, and I promised my dad I'd fly back for every holiday. I made it to about half of them. That math is something I will be doing penance for the rest of my life. Here's the part of my job that matters to this story. I know what undue influence looks like in a courtroom. I know the exact warning signs a judge looks for when a dying man signs paperwork nobody expected him to sign. I understood all of it the way a lifeguard understands the ocean from the outside, professionally. I never imagined I'd be the one standing in the water, watching it happen to my own father. My father, Walter Doyle, built things. He started in 1976 with one leased dump truck, hauling gravel and sand for anybody who'd hire him. By 60, Doyle Aggregate and Supply was delivering to half the contractors in the county. He sold it at a fair price, paid off the house, and put the rest away somewhere sensible. He never talked about the number. He just said he was set. Walter wasn't a hugger. He showed love by rotating your tires without telling you and refusing gas money for it. When my mother died I was 20, it was just the two of us, learning how to be a small, careful family. He had a phrase he used about tools, paperwork, people. Everything's got a place, Bear. You just have to know where to look. The summer before his diagnosis, he said it to me again, out of nowhere, on the phone. He'd been getting his affairs in order. He said there was something with my name on it, put exactly where it belonged. I was merging onto the freeway. I told him that sounded great and asked about his tomatoes instead. I've replayed that call more times than I can count. I didn't ask what, or where. I was 31 and certain there'd be time for details later. That something with my name on it is going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. I just wouldn't understand how much until a year later. Long after the man who hid it could no longer tell me where. Renata Hollis, everyone called her Ren, came into our lives 9 years before that hospice hallway. She managed the front desk at a dental practice, divorced, organized in a way my father genuinely admired. She kept his calendar and alphabetized his spice rack. After years of my dad eating cereal standing at the counter, Having someone run the house on schedule felt like a small miracle. I want to be fair to her, because none of this works if I lie to you. Ren wasn't lazy, and she wasn't cold. When my father got sick, she drove him to chemo at 6 in the morning. She sat through the nights with the bucket and the cold sweats, learned every medication by hour. For a solid year, she was exactly what a dying man needs beside him. I told myself that was enough, that I could be the daughter who called on Sundays, because Ren was the wife who showed up every single day. But somewhere across those 9 years, something had taken root in her. Quiet and stubborn, a belief that staying was the same thing as earning, that every sleepless night had a price tag the estate would eventually cover. She had a son too, Cody Hollis, and he believed it even harder than she did. I didn't see any of that clearly at the time. From 1,000 miles away, all I saw was a tired woman folding laundry at 10 at night. What I couldn't see was that care and ownership had started to look identical to her, and that she'd quietly stopped treating my father like a husband, and started treating him like property she needed to defend from me. The illness lasted 14 months. The final 3 weeks were hospice. For most of that first year, I could still reach my dad Isley a Sunday call, 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Our language, comfortable and unremarkable. Then the call started rolling to voicemail. When I got through, Ren was on the line within 60 seconds. "He's resting, Claire. Let's not get him worked up." It sounded reasonable every time. That's the thing nobody tells you about isolation. It never wears a warning label. It always arrives dressed as protection. I'd text and Ren would answer from his phone. I'd plan a visit and the dates would never quite line up. A procedure, a rough week, a doctor recommending no visitors. I let it happen. I was busy and guilty. And it was easier to trust the woman standing in the house than to fight her long distance from a job that paid my rent. By the time hospice started, I hadn't had a real conversation with my father in almost 2 months. I had no idea how much weight he'd lost. I found out later that Ren had told the intake coordinator she was his only contact. She wasn't, I was listed too, second, in his own handwriting. Somebody just never dialed the second number, until somebody finally did. A hospice nurse I had never met decided that the quiet in my father's room had started to smell wrong. Her name was Denise Coleman, and she is the entire reason I made it into that hallway at all. Denise had been doing hospice work for 21 years. She told me later that you learn to read a room the way sailors read weather, and what she was reading in my father's room had been making her uneasy for weeks. Old friends would show up, and Ren would meet them at the door and send them home again without letting them pass the threshold. The telephone that used to sit on the nightstand had migrated to the windowsill, out of my father's reach. There was a folder on the side table that wasn't medical crisp paperwork with colored tabs that said, "Sign here." Denise watched Ren slide it closer to him more than once, and watched him turn his face to the wall instead. Cody would stop by most evenings, murmur with his mother out in the corridor, and never once take my father's hand. Denise had seen grief do ugly things to families plenty of times. Grief is loud and messy and human. This wasn't that. This was quiet, patient, and aimed. One afternoon, through the cracked door, she heard Ren say, "Walter, we just need this handled before anything happens." And she heard my father answer. So faint, she almost missed it. "Bare, just bare," like a man reaching for a word he couldn't quite hold on to. That night, Denise checked his chart. Buried in the intake paperwork was a second emergency contact, written in my father's own shaky print, with a Sacramento area code. She didn't confront Ren. Some instinct told her to stay quiet instead. She copied the number onto the back of her hand in ballpoint pen and carried it home with her. 2 nights later, she used it. "Let me tell you about Cody, because the whole plan really belonged to him. He was 33, and 2 years earlier he'd sunk his savings into a craft brewery that lasted 11 months before the landlord changed the locks. By the time my father got sick, Cody owed something close to $150,000 to people who don't send polite reminder emails. I didn't know any of this at the time. I'd learn it later, in discovery, but it explains everything that came after. Cody looked at his dying stepfather and saw a closing window. He's the one who found the attorney, a man named Arthur Voss, Who took the clients other lawyers wouldn't touch and never asked to? Many questions about whether a patient on a morphine drip understood what he was signing. I can picture the coaching now, low voices in the corridor, the same phrases repeated until they sounded true. She'll take it all. We have to lock it down before he's gone. Ren didn't need much convincing. She supplied the feeling, Cody supplied the paperwork. For months they'd quietly been moving money, using a power of attorney my father had signed back when he still trusted everyone under that roof. The deathbed signature was just supposed to be the final piece. I need to pause here, because if there's someone sick in your family right now, I want you to actually hear this. Danger almost never shows up looking like a villain. It shows up looking like an exhausted person with a folder saying, "Let's just get this handled while we can." If a sick relative is suddenly being asked to sign things, and you're being quietly kept at arm's length, that's the moment to start asking loud questions. Please don't wait as long as I did. The call came on a Tuesday, a little after 9 at night, from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Claire Doyle? Walter Doyle's daughter?" "Yes," I said, and my stomach already knew before my brain caught up. "My name is Denise. I'm one of the nurses caring for your father. He's listed you as a contact. I don't think anyone's been calling you." I sat down right there on my kitchen floor. "How bad?" I said. Not even a question anymore. "Days," she said gently. "Maybe less." Then her voice changed. Careful, deliberate. "Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. There's paperwork here. Your stepmother is asking him to sign things, and I don't think he understands what they are." The kitchen went very still. "He keeps saying your name," Denise said. "I don't remember packing a bag. I remember the highway in the dark. My hands locked at 10 and 2, the dashboard clock eating hours I'd never get back. I drove 11 hours straight, stopping once for gas and a coffee I never touched. The whole way, the paralegal part of my brain ran its checklist. Cold and clear, underneath the panic, confidential relationship, sudden change, diminished capacity, pressure to sign. Every box my job had trained me to watch for, my own father checking them off 1,000 miles ahead of me, while I kept telling myself I had to be overreacting. I pulled into that hospice parking lot a little after 11 the next night. I bought a coffee in the lobby, because my hands needed something to hold on to. Then I walked down a quiet corridor toward a door standing open about 6 inches, and I heard her say it. "I want you to see that hallway the way I saw it. That particular clean that only exists in buildings where people go to die. Pale linoleum, soft overhead light, a supply cart with little paper cups of medication lined up like a game board. Through the gap in the door I could see the foot of the bed, the four-pole, and above it, tucked near the ceiling, a small amber light, steady, blinking. My father and Ren had put that monitor up months earlier so she could check on him from downstairs. A baby monitor for a grown man. Nobody had ever thought to switch it off. I was reaching for the door when I heard her voice, low and sure of itself. "Sign it now, Walter. Otherwise, she'd drag this out in court for years, over nothing." My hand froze on the handle. I'm the one who never left this house. I've spent my career around people at the worst hour of their lives. And if there's one thing that saved me more than once, it's this. The loudest reaction in a room is almost never the strongest one. So I didn't kick the door open. I stood there and made myself breathe, 1, 2, 3, and listened to a woman I'd trusted with my father's life try to talk a dying man out of his own wishes. Then I looked up at that small blinking light and understood it was still recording, and I pushed the door open. Ren straightened so fast the pen nearly rolled off the blanket. "Claire, you came." She tried to make it sound like relief. It came out sounding like an accusation. I set my coffee on the side table, walked around to the far side of the bed, and took my father's hand. His skin felt like paper. His eyes found mine and stayed there. "Hey Dad," I said. "It's Bear. I'm here." Between us on the table sat a folder with colored tabs. Sign here, and beside it, an uncapped pen, ready and waiting. "He wants to get his affairs settled," Ren said, smoothing a blanket that didn't need smoothing. "We were just finishing up. It's 11 at night," I said quietly. "On a morphine drip. He's lucid," she said. I looked at my father. His gaze drifted, sharpened for a second, then drifted again. He was not lucid. Anyone who'd spent 10 honest minutes with a dying parent would have known that instantly. "Dad," I said, "do you want to sign anything tonight?" His hand tightened around mine barely, but I felt it. Bare, not yes, not no. Just my name, like a man gripping a railing in the dark. Ren's voice climbed. "He knows exactly what he's doing. He told me himself he wants to take care of me." "Then it can wait until morning," I said. "When his actual attorney is here." Actual? I watched that word land on her face. For one unguarded second, she wasn't a grieving wife anymore. She was someone doing quick math and not liking the total. A nurse stepped in behind me and gently suggested it was time to let Mr. Doyle rest. The pen never got picked up again that night. Ren left around midnight. I didn't. I pulled a vinyl chair up beside the bed and held my father's hand in the dark. The 4-pump ticking. Around 2 in the morning, he surfaced. It happens sometimes near the end. A window opens, clear and brief, and then it closes for good. Denise had warned me to watch for it. There his voice was thin as thread, but his eyes were entirely his own again. "You drove 11 hours, I said. "You owe me for gas." He almost laughed. It turned into a cough. I leaned in close. "Dad, is there anything you need me to know? About your paperwork?" He was quiet, a long moment. His hand moved across the blanket like he was reaching for a tool that wasn't there. "Everything's got a place, Bear." His fingers closed on empty air. "I put it where it belongs." "Where, Dad? Where is it?" His eyes were already losing their grip on the room. "You'll find it." A breath. Then the ghost of his old grin. "Sharpest tool in the shed." Those were the last clear words my father ever said to me. Not a location. Not a number. Just faith, handed to me in the dark, that I would find whatever he'd hidden and know exactly what to do with it. I sat there long after his breathing went shallow again. Turning that sentence over, I put it where it belongs. With no idea it was sitting in a moving box in my own hall closet in Sacramento, buried under winter coats, waiting for over a year for me to finally be ready to open it. My father died 61 hours after I walked into that room, just before dawn on a Friday. Denise was with us. Ren was there too, and to her credit, she cried, and I don't believe every bit of it was performance. People are allowed to grieve a person and still want their money. Nobody's tidy like that. I held his hand until it went cool. Then I sat down on the floor of the corridor with my back against the wall. My lobby coffee was still sitting on the side table inside, untouched, the film on top gone gray hours ago. I don't know why that detail is the one that stuck with me. The mind grabs strange small things to keep from going under. I thought there'd be a pause after that, a breath, some room to grieve. There wasn't. By that Friday afternoon, Ren had already taken over everything. Right down to the obituary, which was submitted before I even offered to help. My name appeared once, near the bottom, after Cody's and after her grandchildren's. She'd had my father's body for 14 hours, and she'd spent every one of them building a wall. If you're watching this and someone you love is far away and running out of time, please hear the one thing I wish someone had told me. Don't wait for the holidays. Don't assume there's time for the folder later. Call the people who matter this week, while the line still connects to a voice and not a stranger holding the phone for them. The funeral was the following Wednesday, and the seating is where I first understood the size of what I was up against. Ren sat in the front row, with Cody and her grandchildren, a tidy column of grief. I was placed in the second row, next to my father's younger sister, Aunt Roberta Bobby, who'd driven up from Tennessee and wouldn't look at me. At the reception, I tried to talk to her, and she turned half away and said, "It's a shame you only showed up at the very end." It landed like a slap. "I called every week," I said. "Ren was here," she answered. "Every single day while you were off living your life in California." And there it was, the story Ren had been quietly writing for 9 years, recited back to me in my own aunt's voice like scripture. I looked around that room and saw it everywhere. The cool nods, the conversations that stopped when I got close. Ren moved through it like a widow and a winner at the same time. At one point she touched my arm and murmured, "Just for me, we should talk soon, Claire." About the estate. Your father wanted things kept simple. Simple. I'd heard that word in enough depositions to know exactly what it meant. It meant quiet. It meant fast. It meant before anyone starts asking questions. I smiled the smile I use in conference rooms. The one that gives away absolutely nothing, and said, "Let's get through this week first." Then I went back to my father's empty house and started reading the mail he never got the chance to open. His study desk is where I found it. All of it. I wasn't snooping, I was looking for his address book to notify old friends. In the bottom drawer, under a tray of pens, sat a stack of bank statements, and the floor of my world tilted sideways. I read financial records for a living. So I sat down in his chair and I read. First, the power of attorney signed 16 months earlier, naming Ren as his agent. Completely normal. Sick people sign those all the time. I'd prepared dozens myself. Then I saw what she'd done with it. Over the previous 5 months, money had moved. A brokerage account, drawn down in pieces. 30,000, then 50, then 20, wired to an account I didn't recognize, with Cody's name on the routing memo. A home equity line, opened against the house, and underneath all of it, in a fresh manila envelope, sat the document from the hospice room, a deed. Transferring the house outright to Ren, with Arthur Voss's letterhead across the top. I sat very still and heard her voice again, looping like a song stuck in my head. "Sign it now. I'm the one who never left this house." Then I went looking for the other thing. The folder with my name on it, the one he'd sworn he'd put where it belonged. It wasn't in the desk. It wasn't in the safe. It wasn't anywhere in that house. I tore through 3 rooms before I admitted the obvious. Ren had lived under that roof for 2 years. If anything with my name on it had ever been there, it wasn't anymore. I spent that entire night at my father's kitchen table building a timeline, because that's what I do when I'm frightened. By morning, the chart told a story, and the story was an impulse, it was a campaign. 16 months ago, the power of attorney. 12 months ago, the diagnosis. 5 months ago, the transfers began, small at first, then steady. 3 weeks ago, hospice. Right at the end, the deed. I added it up twice. The brokerage, the credit line, the transfers to Cody, the house itself. Ren and her son had moved, or were trying to move, roughly $2.9 million, nearly everything my father had built across 40 years of hauling gravel before sunrise. The whisper in that hallway suddenly meant something entirely different. It hadn't been a grieving wife's desperate plea. It had been the closing line of a long, patient sales pitch. I felt plenty that night. Grief, fury, a cold shame at how easy I'd made this, by staying so far away. But underneath all of it, my mind kept circling back to the one question my whole career had trained into me. Where's the proof, and who can testify to it? Because feelings don't win in probate court. Documents win. Witnesses win. Timelines win. I had a timeline. I had bank statements. And somewhere out there, a nurse named Denise had watched the entire thing unfold, and copied my number onto the back of her hand. What I didn't have yet was the folder. And I was growing more certain by the hour, that the folder was the piece that mattered most. Ren didn't waste any time. For days after the funeral, she invited me over, sat me down at the dining table, and slid a stapled document across to me. Cody stood by the window, with his arms crossed like a man guarding an exit. "It's a family settlement agreement," Ren said. Arthur drew it up. "It just makes everything simple." I read it slowly, the way I read everything. It was short, which told me plenty on its own. It said I waived any claim to my father's estate. It said I agreed not to challenge any of the transfers. In exchange, Ren would generously provide me $25,000 and my late mother's opal ring. $25,000 out of $2.9 million. "Your father wanted peace, Claire," Ren said, her voice warm and final. "He hated conflict. You know that." There it was again. Sign this, find peace. Same melody, new lyrics. Cody spoke up from the window. "Don't make this ugly. You weren't even here." I looked at the agreement. I looked at the pen, uncapped and helpful, sitting right on top of it. Some people leave a pen out the way hunters leave bait. I thought about my father in that bed, turning his face toward the wall away from a different pen. "I'm not signing this today," I said. Wren's smile went thin. "I'm grieving, Claire." I stood and gathered my coat. "You said it yourself, we grieve before we do paperwork. I'll be in touch." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I simply declined, and I walked to the door. Behind me, I heard Cody mutter to his mother, "She knows. I told you she'd know." That sentence told me they were scared. I just didn't yet understand of what, exactly. I didn't slam the door. I've watched too many people lose a case by saying one sentence too many. I drove back to my father's empty house, sat in the driveway, and let myself shake for exactly 5 minutes. Then I stopped. Here's what a decade in estate litigation had taught me. You never win these fights across a kitchen table. You win them in the record. If I screamed at Wren, the family would close ranks tighter around her. If I begged, I'd lose outright. But if I stayed quiet and let the documents do the talking, I had a real shot. I made 2 decisions in that driveway. I would fight this with the same boring patient tools I used every day at work: petitions, sworn records, testimony, and I would find that folder. My father was the most deliberate man I ever knew. If he'd hidden it well, it wasn't sitting in that house for Wren to stumble across. It was somewhere only I would think to look. I started the engine. It was time to drive home and tear my own life apart searching. Back in Sacramento, I finally did the thing I should have done as a daughter, but instead did as a professional. I built a case. First, the medical records. As next of kin, I requested his full hospice chart. In his final 72 hours, his morphine dosage was documented as significant, with repeated notes about confusion. Denise had written one careful line: "Patient appears distressed during family financial discussions." A patient in that condition cannot legally sign a deed. Capacity isn't a mood, it's a legal standard, and he didn't meet it. Second, the timeline. The transfer dates lined up against the dates of his decline, almost exactly the exact pattern courts are trained to catch. Third, the relationship itself. Wren had been his wife, caregiver, and power of attorney all at once. What my field calls a confidential relationship. When the person in that position benefits from a sudden change made by someone incapacitated, the law flips the burden of proof. The court presumes influence, and forces them to prove they did nothing wrong. I'd cited that rule in filings 100 times in my career. I had never once felt it the way I felt it that night, sitting on my apartment floor with my father's chart across my lap. Wren was going to have to explain herself, not me. I found the folder on a Sunday, and I nearly missed it. I'd spent a full week tearing through my apartment, closets, drawers, every box under the bed. Nothing. Then I remembered the hall closet I'd never fully unpacked. Still stacked with boxes from 4 years earlier. I pulled the door open, and there, wedged behind a box of winter coats, sat a flat rate shipping box postmarked from Michigan, 13 months old. I remembered it then, the way you remember a dream. It had arrived during a brutal stretch at work. My father had called to say something was on its way and told me to keep it safe. I'd shoved it in that closet, meaning to deal with it later. Later had turned into 13 months and a funeral. I sat down on the floor and opened it. Inside was a manila folder. On the front, in his blocky all caps handwriting, "Bear." My hands weren't steady. Inside the folder sat a business card for an attorney named Margaret Vance, back in Michigan, and behind it, a thick document with a navy blue cover. It was a revocable living trust, dated 13 months earlier, signed while he was still sharp, still fully himself, witnessed and notarized properly in an actual law office. The trust held the house. It held the brokerage account. It held nearly everything he owned. And it named exactly one person as successor trustee, the one who'd control all of it. Once he was gone, my father had quietly, deliberately put everything where it belonged more than a year before he died. He just never got the chance to tell me where the map was. "Everything's got a place, Bear." He'd meant it literally the whole time. I called Margaret Vance first thing Monday. She remembered him instantly. "Walter Doyle," she said, her voice warming, then dropping when I told her he'd passed. "I'm so sorry." He was a careful man. He came to me knowing exactly what he wanted. I flew back to Michigan that week and sat across from her at a long conference table. She explained it to me the way I would have explained it to a client, except it landed completely differently when it was my own family. The trust controls the major assets, she said. Not the will, not the power of attorney. A properly funded trust like this supersedes both. She tapped the blue cover. Your father moved the house and the accounts into this trust 13 months ago. Legally, by the time he got sick, he no longer personally owned most of what your stepmother was moving around. For the first time in weeks, I felt solid ground under my feet. So the transfers were pulled from trust assets, I said, using a power of attorney, by someone who wasn't the trustee. Margaret folded her hands. That's not just questionable, Claire. That's self-dealing by an agent. It's actionable. And the deed she wanted signed at the hospice. He couldn't deed away what the trust already held. Even if he'd been perfectly clear-headed, which the chart says he wasn't. I sat with that for a moment. Ren and Cody had spent 5 months in a deathbed whisper trying to steal a house that, on paper, my father had already protected. They'd been so focused on circling the will, that it never occurred to them to ask whether there was a trust underneath it. Margaret leaned forward. You have standing, and you have duties now. The question is what you want to do with them. I want to do it right, I said. All of it, on the record. We filed 2 petitions in probate court. The first asked the court to confirm the trust, and my role as trustee. The second asked the court to recover the transferred assets and void the deed, on the grounds of self-dealing and undue influence. I'll be honest about what I felt drafting those documents. Part of me wanted to make it hurt, to put every ugly, cruel detail in the filing and call Ren exactly what she was. I didn't. I'd watched for over a decade. What happens to people who let their anger write their legal paperwork? They overreach. They come across vindictive. They hand the other side free sympathy. So I wrote it, cold and clean dates, dollar figures, the timeline. Let the chart do the screaming so I didn't have to. Then I called Denise. I have to ask you something difficult, I told her. Would you be willing to testify about what you saw, about the night you called me? She didn't hesitate. I left that monitor recording on purpose, Claire. I'm a mandatory reporter for a reason. I'd do it again tomorrow. I thanked her, and I meant it more than I had words for. But I also told her the truth, because she'd earned it. The footage helps. It really does. But it isn't the whole case. Footage can be argued around in court. What actually wins is the trust, the medical chart, and the law itself. I paused. You didn't catch her on camera so much as you bought me the time to build this the right way. Then let's do it right, she said. I hung up, and for the first time since that hallway, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like my father's daughter, finally standing in the right water. Ren and Cody were served on a Thursday. I wasn't there, but I heard about it fast. Cody called me 11 minutes after the process server left, and he wasn't whispering anymore. You ungrateful, he caught himself. Do you have any idea what my mother did for that man? I do, I said. I've read the hospice notes. She was there. Nobody's denying that. Then drop this, or I swear, Cody. I let his name hang a beat. How much do you owe? The line went dead silent. In Discovery, the numbers came out, and they explained everything. Cody's brewery had collapsed 2 years earlier. He owed roughly $150,000 across 3 creditors, one of whom had already filed suit. He'd been weeks from losing his truck. The transfers with his name on the wire memo lined up almost perfectly with his own payment deadlines. This was never really about my father. It was about a drowning man who spotted a dying one and grabbed for the life raft, and a mother who convinced herself she was helping her son, not robbing a stranger. I didn't feel triumphant reading those numbers. I felt tired. The same proof that saves you is proof your own family chose money over you, in writing, with dates attached. But it also quieted the old guilt that kept whispering, maybe you should have just signed and walked away. They had planned this while my father was still alive enough to be frightened by it. I owed him the follow-through. Arthur Voss turned out to be the weak point, and he seemed to know it before anyone said so out loud. When an attorney drafts a deed for a man on a morphine drip, with no independent witness and no capacity evaluation. He isn't protecting a client, he's building a liability with his own name on it. His deposition was almost painful to read. He said he'd been told the patient was lucid. He said he relied entirely on the family's word and had never once met my father in person. Every conversation had gone through Cody or Ren. He said, paraphrasing only slightly, that in hindsight he might have handled things differently. In hindsight is the sound a man makes right before he becomes the cautionary tale in someone else's continuing education seminar. His own file notes worked against him. He'd logged the date and time of the signing, and it matched the chart entry describing my father as confused and heavily sedated. He'd documented his own malpractice without meaning to. By the end of the deposition, he'd all but stopped defending the deed. He was too busy defending himself. The week before the hearing, my Aunt Bobby called. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. I owe you an apology, she said, and it cracked on the last word. She'd seen the filings, seen the numbers, and somewhere in there, the story Ren had been telling for 9 years had finally split open. She told it so, sure, Claire. I believed her. I'm sorry. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. You should know, whatever else is true, Ren really did sit with your father through the worst of the chemo. I was there for some of those nights. She held the bucket. She sang to him when he couldn't sleep. A pause. That part was real. I let that be true, because it was. This is the part of the story I can't simplify, and I won't try to. The woman who whispered "sign it now" over my dying father had also held his head through the roughest nights of his life. Both things happened. Both things were her. She'd earned real gratitude. She had not earned the right to take everything by sliding paper under a sedated man's hand. I decided that week what I would not do. I wouldn't try to leave her with nothing. My father's trust had already provided for her fairly, a genuine bequest, and lifetime use of the house. He'd chosen that deliberately, and I wasn't going to fight it. I'd only undo what she'd actually stolen, not $1 more. That decision, I think, is the only reason I was able to walk into that courtroom calm instead of furious. The hearing landed on a Tuesday in March, in a probate courtroom that smelled like old paper and floor polish. I'd sat in rooms like it 100 times for work. I had never once sat at the table myself. Margaret sat beside me. Across the aisle, Ren and Cody sat with a tired-looking attorney who had clearly read the entire file and clearly wished he hadn't. In the gallery, Aunt Bobby sat 2 rows back on my side and gave me a small, steadying nod. On the table in front of me, I'd arranged 3 things in order: the trust with its blue cover, the medical chart, and a folder of bank statements marked with colored tabs, the same kind Ren had used on that deed. I'd chosen those tabs on purpose. The judge was a woman in her 60s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, with no patience for theatrics. This is a petition regarding the estate and trust of Walter Doyle, she said. I've read the filings. Let's not waste the morning. I felt the old courtroom calm settle over me, the one I'd borrowed off a dozen different attorneys across a dozen years. My pulse was racing. My hands were completely still. Ren caught my eye across the aisle and mouthed a single word. I think it was peace. As if the word still had any currency left. I glanced up toward the corner of the courtroom, out of pure habit, half expecting to see a small amber light blinking somewhere near the ceiling. There was no camera in that room. There didn't need to be. This time, the record was the kind nobody could reach over and switch off. It was on paper, sworn, dated, and it was finally going to speak for itself. Denise testified first. Calm and precise, the way good nurses always are. She described the final weeks, the managed visitors, the phone moved out of reach, the paperwork with the colored tabs. I've done hospice work for 21 years, she said. I know the difference between a family grieving and a family working. Ren's attorney tried to rattle her, asking if she was really certain what she'd heard through a mostly closed door. The door was open about 6 inches, Denise said. And she wasn't being quiet. What exactly did you hear? Denise looked at the judge, not at me. I heard Mrs. Hollis tell her dying husband to sign it now. I heard her say his daughter would drag it out in court for years over nothing. A pause, and I heard her say, I'm the one who never left this house. The words landed in that quiet room like stones dropped down a well. I'd heard them once in a dark hallway. Hearing them again, under oath, in daylight, was somehow worse. The monitor footage was entered into evidence. It showed exactly what Denise had described, and it showed my father's hand turning away from the pen. But here's the truth about how these cases actually work. The recording didn't win it. It corroborated. What really carried the day was the stack of paper my father had signed in a quiet law office 13 months before his mind ever started to slip. Margaret laid out the rest, one piece at a time, in a voice as flat as a spreadsheet. The trust, dated well before his decline, properly witnessed and notarized. The medical chart, with its notes on confusion and distress. The transfers, lined up against Cody's debt deadlines like an unsigned confession. Then she said the sentence that turned the whole room. Mrs. Hollis was the decedent's wife, his caregiver, and his agent under power of attorney. She benefited directly from transfers made while he was incapacitated. Under the law, that raises a presumption of undue influence. The burden now shifts to her. The tired attorney across the aisle didn't have much left to rebut it with. And that's when Wren broke. She stood before her own lawyer could stop her, her face flushed, her voice climbing toward the ceiling tiles. I gave him everything. Do you understand that? I held the bucket. I cleaned him. I sat there every single night while she jabbed a finger at me, was off in California living her life. Mrs. Hollis, the judge said. I'm the one who stayed, Wren shouted, the last of the softness stripped clean off it. I stayed. The room went silent, and I did the one thing I'd practiced for nothing. I didn't stand. I didn't answer her. I sat with my hands folded and let her be the loudest person in that room. Because in a courtroom, the loudest person almost never wins. The judge looked at her for a long moment over the top of her glasses. Sit down, Mrs. Hollis, she said quietly. It carried further than any shout could have. Staying with a man is not the same thing as owning him. When it was finally my turn, I kept it short. I'd watched too many people lose by saying one sentence too many. I stood, looked at Wren, not with hatred, just plainly, the way you'd look at weather rolling in. You did stay with him, I said. That was real, and I'm grateful for it. He wanted you cared for, and his trust does exactly that. She blinked. She'd braced for an attack, and didn't quite know what to do with the truth instead. But you stayed with him. You never signed anything with him. I let that sit in the open a moment. He put things where they belonged over a year before any of this happened. He just trusted me to find it. I turned to the judge. That's all I'm asking the court to do. Put it back where he put it. Then I sat down. The judge didn't need long. She found that the trust controlled the major assets. She found the deed invalid, signed by a man without capacity. She found the transfers made under the power of attorney to be self-dealing, and ordered them reversed and certified. When the accountants finished the math, the total that moved back into my father's trust, away from Wren and Cody, came to just over $2.9 million. The same number Wren had whispered toward in that hallway, returned in full to exactly where he'd wanted it. I didn't cheer. There was nothing to cheer about. I just looked down at the navy blue cover of the trust on the table in front of me, the careful, deliberate work of a careful, deliberate man, and thought one clear sentence. I found it, Dad. I found where it belongs. The aftermath came fast and quiet, the way real consequences usually do. No fireworks, just doors closing one by one. Cody was ordered to repay every dollar traced to his accounts. With his existing debts already crushing him, the surcharge didn't ruin him so much as confirm a ruin already underway. This was civil, not criminal, but the life raft he'd reached for was gone, and the creditors were still there. Arthur Voss fared worse in his own particular world. The ruling included a formal note about the deed, and that note made its way to the state bar. He wasn't disbarred on the spot, but a review was coming, and a man who builds his practice on the cases other lawyers won't take, can't easily survive one. Wren sat through the rest of it without saying another word. Whatever fire had carried her through that outburst was gone, and what was left looked a great deal like exhaustion. The performance was over. There was no audience left to play the widow for. Aunt Bobby found me in the hallway afterward and hugged me hard. Your father would be proud, she said. Not of the money, of how you did it. I held on to that because the truth is, I hadn't won the way the angry part of me once wanted to win. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I hadn't raised my voice once. I'd simply, patiently, put a careful man's wishes back exactly where they belonged. Walking out of that courthouse into a cold, bright afternoon, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a daughter who had finally come home. Settling the estate took another 5 months. As trustee, I handled it the way my father handled everything, carefully, on paper, exactly where it belonged. Wren kept what the trust genuinely provided her, the right to live in the house for life, plus a real bequest, his choice made while his mind was entirely his own. People sometimes ask why I didn't take everything after what she tried to do. Because taking all of it would have made me exactly the person she'd accused me of being. Someone who treats family like an estate sale. My father held space for her right to the end. And I wasn't going to overrule a dead man's mercy, just because I was still angry. So Wren stayed in the house. We are not friends, and never will be. But she has precisely what he intended, and not a dollar more. The $2.9 million went back into the trust, and out to exactly where his instructions sent it. Some to me. Some to a scholarship fund at the trade school, where he'd learned to read a blueprint at 17. Set up quietly, years before any of this. I think about that scholarship more than I think about my own share. Somewhere, every year, a kid with calluses on their hands gets a little help. Because a careful man once put things exactly where they belonged. I set one boundary with Wren, and I said it exactly once. In a single email she could reread as many times as she liked. I told her the legal matter was closed, that she had what my father intended for her, and that I wouldn't be discussing any of it further. I wished her peace, and I told her plainly that we wouldn't be part of each other's lives going forward. No drama, no long letter, one clean line, drawn once and kept. Aunt Bobby and I talk every Sunday now, 20 minutes about nothing in particular, the way I used to talk with my dad. It isn't the same, but it's something. And I don't let that line go quiet anymore. Denise and I still send each other a card every year. On the anniversary of the night, she dialed a number she'd written on the back of her own hand. A few weeks after it was finally over, I sat at my own kitchen table in Sacramento with a fresh cup of coffee. Not lobby coffee going cold in a hospice corridor, but real coffee, in my own mug, still warm. I drank the whole cup. It was the first time in a long while I let myself sit still without a legal pad in front of me. If there's one thing I learned standing in that hallway with cold coffee in my hand, it's this: staying isn't the same as being owed. And the people who love you quietly will trust you to find what they hid, long after they can no longer point the way there themselves. That's my story. One nurse who noticed. One folder my father mailed before he ever forgot my name. If this reminded you to check on a healthcare directive, or to look in on someone who's being kept a little too quiet, do it today. This has been her side of the story, for every woman who held it together, alone. If this one stayed with you, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.